anxious, which is that when I'm reading, I'm always wondering, where is this person writing this book? And for instance, famously in The Liars Club by Mary Karr, I went mad with frustration because there's one scene, and now we all know what happened to Mary Karr because she's written other books about it, but there's one scene in that book where she says, when we're sitting at our family dinner and my son, da-da-da-da, and I'm like, wait a minute, you're telling me that you went through all this horrible stuff, but now you have a son and a happy household? Tell me more about that. How did that happen? You know, it's the healing that really rivets me. So I think because I want other writers to do it, I do it. But I also think, now I'm going to go to another level of metaphorical truth, that, you know, we all write out of our own experience, whether we're writing biography or memoir or fiction. It's our own experience is all we have. It's, you know, what Louis Auchincloss called the writer's capital. And so that I want the writing of whether it's a biography or what to be a little bit transparent. I want the reader's curiosity to ultimately be satisfied. And I think that's another reason why I do it. I think if I had described that scene, the scene that Al's talking about is, you know, Margaret Fuller was killed in a shipwreck in 1850 off Fire Island. And she happened to be killed off the part of Fire Island where you can't go unless you're a Mayflower descendant. I mean, literally, you can't go to this town unless you own property there, and you can't buy property there unless a board passes you. And that's where she shipwrecked. So I thought that was
inconvenient for a
well,
researcher.
she would have been outraged. I mean, you know, so I had to get myself into that town by calling a cousin who called a cousin who called a cousin. And then I wanted to be on the beach. She shipwrecked at 3:30 in the morning. I wanted to see what that was like to be on that beach, to be on a boat 100 yards offshore. You know, I wanted to be there, to feel it. And so I could have done it without telling that backstory. But it seemed to me, as a reader, I would want to know that backstory. It seems interesting to me that whatever harmony there is in the universe shipwrecked Margaret Fuller off Point of Woods. And I understand that Margaret Fuller and Point of Woods, for me, they're sort of flashpoints, but they aren't yet for the reader. But I want to explain to the reader how bizarre that is. I want to share my delight in the weirdness of the universe by saying to the reader, wow, look at this, we're at Point of Woods. I had to call this one, this one, this one, this one, and, you know, get out my DAR papers to even get in here. And then to get my daughter in, they wouldn't let us spend the night. We had to go, I forget how much of this is in there. We had to go to a motel.
That part's not in there.
We had to go to a motel in the next town. I mean, it really was hilarious and heartbreaking because the shipwreck is heartbreaking. So I wanted to give the reader as much as they wanted about that. And I guess, so I don't think of it as authorial intrusion. I think of it as authorial sharing. Authorial, has to be a nicer word.
Realness. I mean, it's, why not tell that story? You wrote the book. What could possibly be in the minds of people who find that jarring? I mean, this is 2010 now. We've experimented in narrative in all kinds of ways. Why? Did I say 2010? I'm so yesterday.
Thank God you have students.
That thought is yesterday.
No, that's
Thank you,
not
Amelia.
yesterday.
That's worth
last year.
That was all so last year. What could? I mean, why are we so? You mentioned last night in biography we're behind. In just general nonfiction, the degree to which you're permitted to experiment without people freaking out about it is fairly, not you,
well,
generally, is fairly limited.
There are people, and then there are the critics. And I think that, I mean, I see the critics and the critical establishment and the editors as a flaming hoop through which I have to jump to get to you guys. And you're the people I'm writing for. And that's why I love book tours. That's why I love doing this stuff. I actually meet people who've actually read my work. But to get to you, I have to go through all these people who have completely different agendas and who've been entirely corrupted by power, in my opinion. So it's they who say this is disruptive. But I think that people, that change is hard for people. And I think, we saw with biography, as I said yesterday, what happened to poor Ed Morris, who wrote a biography of Ronald Reagan in which he inserted himself as a character, and they just blew him out of the water. And I thought that was a really interesting thing for him to do. Like it or not, it was interesting to take biography and fictionalize a thread of it. But change is hard for people, and provocation is hard for people, and, it's hard for them, and they want it to be the way they expect it to be. But I also think, let me go on with this, that we have some weird thing in our culture, which I call memoir shame. And it's shame about, especially being a woman, about being confessional, about having feelings. It's some weird, you've all read Frederick Jackson Turner and The Frontier. It's some weird leftover. We're supposed to be out there chopping wood and baking bread and having children in the field. And, we're not supposed to be dwelling on the past and saying, oh, my mom was mean to me. We're not supposed to, and, we're not supposed to have any of these feelings that I certainly have and that many women have. And when we write books that have these feelings in them, which are often memoirs, there's a lot of, hemming and hawing in this group of editors and reviewers. People love these books. People buy these books. We're all hungry for this information of what it feels like, of what would happen if you confessed your darkest secrets, of what would happen if you overcame your shame, memoir and otherwise. But my theory about memoir, you just stop me when you need to stop me, is that there's a political dimension to it, and that until the invention of the memoir, which happened in about, let's say it happened when I wrote Home Before Dark in 1984, many people didn't have a voice in this world. Young women who were seduced by their professors, people who worked for punishing famous literary figures, as assistants, people from different races, people of color. All these people were essentially disenfranchised. Women didn't get to tell their stories in this way. These stories were told in kitchens and ladies' rooms, And all of a sudden, with the possibility of memoir, all kinds of people who had no authority before get to say, this is what it was like. This is what it was like to be the daughter of a schizophrenic. This is what it was like to be seduced by the most famous writer in America. This is what it was like. And of course, authority doesn't get challenged without biting back. In other words, all memoir is really a challenge to authority as a form. It's really an ordinary person saying, this is what it was like for me. It's not a person who in any other way has any power. So when ordinary people start saying, this is what it was like for me, and especially if they're women, it makes people upset, and authority bites back. And authority says, well, these memoirs are nothing more than confessional, feminine, whines. But the truth is, these memoirs are amazing. And politically, they've given people a voice who didn't have a voice before. And I think that's the real problem, not just with memoir, but with this authorial intrusion, with somebody coming into what was supposed to be a nice, conventional biography of a nice 19th century figure